You're listening to The Local Maximum, episode 255.
Time to expand your perspective. Welcome to The Local Maximum. Now, here's your host, Max Sklar.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. You have reached another Local Maximum. Today's an exciting day on the internet, isn't it? Well, actually, there are a lot of stories that we could talk about today. But today's biggest story that I want to get to is this new product announcement on the internet. So why don't we read this new product announcement? New ChatGPT AI launches to revolutionize online communication. Introducing ChatGPT, the new artificial intelligence designed to revolutionize online communication. Developed by OpenAI, ChatGPT is a large language model trained on a massive amount of data to produce human-like responses to user input. With ChatGPT, users can engage in natural, free-flowing conversation with a digital assistant, whether you need help with a task, want to have a casual conversation, or just want to learn about a particular topic, ChatGPT is here to help. One of the key features of ChatGPT is its ability to generate highly relevant and informative responses to user queries. By leveraging the latest advancements in natural language processing, ChatGPT can provide detailed answers to complex questions and help users learn more about a wide range in topics. The article goes on, but first, Aaron, let's take a guess as to where this article comes from.
Oh, I can't fairly guess because I've already spoiled myself on this one. But this was not actually a published product release from OpenAI.
No, it is from ChatGPT itself. When I asked it to write a blurb about ChatGPT for the podcast, and maybe it's a little longer. There's another 3 paragraphs it gave me. I don't want to keep reading it. I mean, one person said on Twitter, this is ChatGPT is like having dreams. Everyone wants to share theirs, but nobody wants to hear other people's. I don't think that's true. I think some of what I see from other people's is fascinating, but maybe we don't have to read everything that we got. But some of it is quite exciting. I think that this is the first time in a while that we've seen a demo on the internet that has captured the imagination this much, and this has not come out of nowhere. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let me just go through some Twitter reactions, and then I'll get yours. The two that I thought that were most kind of summarized. These aren't like big accounts, but the two Twitter reactions that I think summarize what the Twitterverse is saying is Ihar Manhaniak, who said, ChatGPT is the first technology that sucks you in for days since nothing I can remember really. All the smart people I know have spent the last few days playing with ChatGPT, and the smartest have already started to create new businesses on top of it. Nick Floor at Professor F says, okay, I've been playing more with ChatGPT and coding questions. This technology will revolutionize the teaching of coding. It can even find bugs if you paste your code and ask it to find a bug. I seriously got chills using it. It can function as a TA for Programming 101. Wow.
So before we dive too far into this, when was this launch actually announced? When did it
good question. I think it was very recently.
I believe it was within the past week, but I don't have the dates in front of me.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure.
So this has been out for less than 7 days at the point of when we're recording here. And it looks like it may have initially been.
I think it was like Friday.
To a select number of people, but at this point, anyone who has a OpenAI account can use it, and anybody can get an OpenAI account. In fact, in the hour before we started recording, I went and created an account and started playing with it myself. So there's very low barrier to entry. It's not like some of the kind of AI graphic stuff where you need to have access to a high-powered server with lots of compute power going on in the background. It's pretty much anybody who can get to a web browser can start playing around with this, which is neat. I think one of the interesting and I don't have the tweet in front of me, so I can't cite who said this, but there's been some concern. One of the tweets you read was saying, well, it can function as a TA for Programming 101. one of the concerns was, this is really going to up the game for cheating on term papers, because you can basically give it a 1 or a 2 sentence prompt, and it'll spit out maybe not a multi-page paper, but it can do a pretty decent length of an essay on an exam response. That's maybe not A+ material, but is certainly B+, A- material.
I could have used that basically anything where I got less than a B+, which occasionally happened.
The best response I saw to that was from somebody who said, "Don't worry about it." Someone who was a professor said, "I asked it to create an assignment for me." And then I asked it to create a grading rubric for me. And then I asked it to write a paper using that assignment. And then I asked it to grade that paper using the grading rubric. So if they're going to cheat on the papers, we'll just cheat on the grading, and problem solved.
So basically it all comes down to prompt writing then. Who wrote the best prompts to the teacher's
and we've
prompts?
been talking about that. I don't know if we've talked much about it on the show, but in the
and we've got to get to basically
generated art piece.
I'm worried
that's where the skill comes in.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I was talking over you. The computer generated art. It's all about prompts. I think that we're so excited because we've been using this over the last day. I think there are a lot of listeners out there who haven't used this yet and don't understand what the fuss is. And this is one of the few times where I'm saying, go do it, go get the account and go see for yourself. But you could really give this thing prompts like write an essay that says X, Y, and Z, write a speech, and also like write code that does certain things, particularly simple things. I think this is going to really help me if I'm coding in a new language, or even if I'm coding in a language that I've used a lot, like Scala or Python or whatever, but there's some aspect of it I haven't used in a while, and it's like, I don't remember off the top of my head how to do this, and it's like, write some code that sorts write some code that sorts a list in descending order in Python. I know there's like a special thing you could put in to make it do descending instead of ascending, but I don't remember exactly what that is. You put that in and it'll go exactly, and I think that will be improvement over Google. When you type it, and it usually sends you to Stack Overflow, which usually includes a bunch of wrong answers and a bunch of questions that you're not necessarily looking for. And
or the hundreds of other websites which are just people who've copied the answer from Stack Overflow and are trying to SEO their own website with that.
Right. And so you could say, yes, OpenAI, this particular product, which is based on GPT-3, which we've talked about before, and I actually reviewed, I listened to the entire episode 134 previously, and that, well, I'll get to that in a second. But this is even if it's not always correct, it's a lot faster. I think it's going to be a lot more correct than Google is for these types of things. People have said they've typed in their medical symptoms and got potential diagnoses. People have said that it's good. Just like we said with Bayesian inference, the most important thing is generating good hypotheses. This is great at generating hypotheses for answers to questions.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the killer features, like you said, is you've already compared it to Google, is that when Google gives you results that aren't exactly what you're looking for, it can be really difficult to tweak your search parameters to get it to point at something that's not quite that, but I know what I want, but I don't know how to put it into terms that the Google search engine can understand how I want it to modify. And whereas in here, you get a response and you can literally say, okay, yeah, do that. But, for example, I asked it to write an intro to this episode, and it came out with a response. And your comment was, yeah, that's a little too much in the style of NPR. So I told it,
right,
okay, rewrite that intro, but in a style with more energy and less like NPR.
Oh,
and
okay.
It came out and it did that. And so I think the ability to almost conversationally redirect the AI or whether you're using it for searching or for generating something is a killer feature. So you no longer have to be an expert on Boolean search parameters to find what you want through Google.
I've been talking about this. I've been talking about this for years. I talked about this. I mean, I don't want to take too much credit, but no, I gave when I talked at the TopBots conference in Austin back in 2016. I was talking about MarsBot. I talked exactly about the conversational nature of search that needs to happen, and I'm so glad they did it.
And there was some preliminary ability for that in MarsBot.
Oh yeah. But it wasn't. It was literally. It was hard coded by me. But it was more of a There was no neural net behind it, but it was a good proof of concept.
But you certainly had the ability to respond to it and say, more of this or less of that, or how about something a little bit more like this, and. It was a little bit brittle in that you moved too far outside of the parameters of what it's expecting, what you kind of hard coded in there, and it gives you a nonsense response. But it did have the ability to respond to that on the fly, rather than Google just spits out your results, and if you want to search for something else, you got to put a new search parameter in.
Exactly. And so I think this is the first time I think something could eat into Google's market share seriously in the last decade.
They're
I'm
certainly
reminded,
moving in this space, so I would expect them to incorporate something like this into their search bar as soon as they can.
Okay, but keep this in mind. So we've been covering this for a while on the show, and the last time we covered GPT-3 was episode 134, which I actually would recommend going back to if you're interested, because that was when GPT-3 itself came out. By the way, this is
that was over 2 years ago.
Right. This was August 2020. So OpenAI is the AI company. It's the one. It was founded by Elon Musk. It's run by Sam Altman of Y Combinator. Elon is kind of he sometimes cheerleads it, but he's also upset that they're for profit now and they're not, and he's worried about he's worried about the consequences of what they're doing. But we could talk about that another time. There's so many aspects of this to cover that it's hard to get to everything. But okay, so this is from OpenAI. OpenAI came out with this GPT-3, which is not surprisingly, their third iteration of these large language models in 2020. This version is basically... It's
hard to believe it's been that long, because it still feels new. But I guess they keep rolling out a new offshoot of it, a new variant every couple of months, it seems.
Right. No, they've been iterating on it, and I think this iteration is not necessarily about making the model better, but about presenting it as a product. This is the attempt to present it as a product, which is really exciting. And by the way, and they're also working on GPT-4, which is coming out, I don't know when, but I think within the next year. Each one is in order.
To wonder whether they'll be able to take all of the work they've done with things like ChatGPT. That's a bit of a tongue twister.
Right.
And just swap in GTP4 under the hood. And have it seamlessly update, or if there are enough fundamental differences in how GTP4 is being generated versus 3 that will require kind of some major redesigns.
Now, look, I also want to compare this to Google, because we talked about Google later in episode 149, and I didn't put the pieces together until now of GPT of episode of OpenAI versus Google. Google. All of the stories that we've seen out of Google has just been about, how much drama there's been, how everyone's calling attention to themselves, the activism, the so-called AI ethics people who are in there trying to essentially muck things up, essentially just complain about things the whole time. It seems like they haven't been building. I don't know. I'm sure they've been building to some extent, but it seems like their organization is not focused on building this out as a product, whereas this smaller company, although well-funded company, OpenAI, which has been at this for 7 years, which is really what you have to do in order to build something like this. They've been focused on building, and they've been iterating this whole time, and you could see it. You could see the results.
I wonder if that's partially. So I know there's been a lot of concern about not. Weaponizing is perhaps too strong a term, but how this could be taken in a unfortunate direction if all the training wheels, all the guardrails are taken off, and it's possible that that's part of what's been holding the folks at Google back, is that they're taking a much more cautious, much slower route of progress on this. I think maybe more likely is that they aren't looking for kind of external facing uses when. Whatever they've developed, they want to use internally, and because they've got so much other infrastructure built up, they want to find a way. Okay, how do we use this to strengthen the Google or the Alphabet brand and in our internal processes? Whereas OpenAI, that they don't have a cash cow product already that they need to strengthen. This is their primary objective. So maybe it's a matter of the big incubator that Alphabet may be isn't going to take an idea like this and go full steam ahead with it, because they've got just too many other irons in the fire. Kind of like a Bell Labs or some of the stuff that came out of like Xerox PARC back in the day that was truly innovative, but somebody else had to really see it, realize, oh, that's super cool, there's so many things I could do with it, and then take it and run with it. Thinking, for example, some of the early graphical interfaces and things like the mouse that Apple and Microsoft really pushed in a direction that they didn't invent it, and the people who did invent it weren't really thinking how to use it in the same context.
So I mean, are you saying who is Apple in this situation? Is it Google or is it OpenAI?
It certainly isn't Google. It might be OpenAI. Although,
right.
OpenAI is at least being a lot more public about what they've discovered, and they may not be the ones to come up with the killer use case and make billions off of it, but they're certainly making a play for that. Whereas Google isn't, or if they are, they're doing it in such a stealth way that we haven't seen evidence of that yet. And they could still surface 6, 12, 18 months down the road and have something that blows us all away and completely revolutionizes the market. But there's no indicator that that's where things are going right now.
Yeah. So and especially with all of the internal turmoil at Google and the internal politics that we've seen.
Well, to be
around
fair, it's tough to judge how much, and I haven't heard much about internal turmoil there recently. Yeah. I know you've made the comment in the past that you've heard in the news and from some of it was like from recruiters while you were at Foursquare, people talking about, oh yeah, I hear things are real bad over there at Foursquare, when that wasn't your perception from the inside. So we want to be cautious about that. But yes, there has been drama in the past. Yeah,
well, I just hear from friends who work at Google, although I haven't spoken to anyone too recently, that it's not a place where. And this has been plaguing a lot of the tech industry recently, although things are turning around now. And now we have an age of austerity, and people are going to have to get things done. But it's like, Google became the opposite of what it was 15 years ago. It became the slow lumbering company that.
I mean, they were never the go fast and break things. That wasn't quite their motto. But for a long time, they were kind of nimble and innovative, and you could do cool and interesting things there, and they have maybe a little bit too much inertia for that now, it seems. Right. So there are certain things that we maybe can get to into the future. First of all, like how these things work, how they're trained. We've gone over it a little bit in the program in the past. Actually went over it a little bit in episode 134, although not as much as I would like. The end of that episode is kind of cool because I was talking about how to revive New York City after COVID, which is still relevant to today. Honestly, the stuff that I said the last half of that episode was basically stuff that we could just repeat 2-3 years later. But I do want to cover a little bit, go into a little bit more depth on how it works. And then, of course, all the applications that this could entail, which, we'll see. I mean, that could be multiple episodes. We'll talk a little bit about it today. But today I thought, since we only have a certain amount of time and we're just getting started on this and we just got, we're just new at this, let's talk about some of our initial experiences of what we've seen on the platform, and then maybe invite the listeners to go on our locals, maximum.locals.com, or you could email us, localmaxradio@gmail.com, and just tell us, what excites you the most about this technology and what you've seen it do from some of your prompts. So I want to start with the one that you sent, actually, and you had it direct me on how to introduce the topic from the podcast. And this is the one where we said it was too NPR-like.
So why don't I read it? I'll read it in an NPR-like voice. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about ChatGPT, a powerful language model developed by OpenAI. I can't do that voice. I'm sorry, Aaron. That's it. I'll just use my normal voice. And ChatGPT uses machine learning algorithms to generate human-like text and respond to questions in real time. We'll be discussing how ChatGPT works, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to read the whole thing. There's some key points. Okay. And so you wrote in response, can you rewrite that introduction in a more energetic style, less like NPR? Okay, so you wrote that directly, less like NPR. Can we see it? Okay. Hey there, and welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be diving into ChatGPT, the amazing language model created by OpenAI. You see, I already want to read this happier. ChatGPT, they really need to rename this because it's ChatGPT is a mouthful. ChatGPT uses machine learning to generate human-like text and answer questions in real time. We're going to talk about how it works, what it can do, and why it's so darn cool. And then it explained what it did. Can I read this? It ends the quote that I'm supposed to read, and then it explains to me why I'm reading it. ChatGPT tells us now. This is the part where it's not telling us to tell you, but it's telling us just for us. Am I getting too meta here? It's telling us just tell us. By using a more energetic and enthusiastic tone, you can make the introduction more engaging and exciting for your audience. You can also consider using more informal language and making references to pop culture or current events to connect with your listeners and make the topic more relatable. So it's like giving you...
this reminds me of... there was... and I think it may have come out of OpenAI, but there was a tool a few months back, maybe it was even longer than that, but it was based off GTP3 that could tell you jokes, or it was you could tell it a joke and it would explain the joke and why it was funny.
Right.
And so that second part, it's like the meta analysis of the context. It's very similar in how that's being done there.
Yeah, there was this movie 20 years ago, Robin Williams as a robot called Bicentennial Man, and he definitely had like a joke telling mode. And there's we should go back and watch that movie.
It reminds me of my 4.5-year-old will sometimes tell a joke, and he's like 50-50 hit or miss on whether the joke is actually funny or not, but he will then go on to explain to you why it's funny and why it's a joke. And it's sometimes more hilarious when the joke wasn't funny at all, and then he explains to me what the pun or the play on words involved there was.
Yeah. I would like to remind the audience that your 4-year-old became the youngest person ever to appear on the podcast at age 3 days, I believe, because we've been doing the podcast for that long.
That's a little mind-boggling.
It is. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I haven't even asked it to do jokes yet. So there's so much stuff you can try. I don't think it will be as good as Robin Williams in the delivery, but I'm sure it can be pretty good. If anything, it's just copying jokes from elsewhere, and a lot of this is copying style prose from elsewhere and mimicking, which is not, and we talked about in those previous episodes about, what does it mean to understand a concept? And it's not going to understand the concepts in the same way that we do, but it's going to understand which concepts are associated with which other concepts. It has some kind of knowledge graph that it's going to construct in its neural net. And it's going it's got a lot more memory than some of the previous iterations we've seen before. Right. Where it could maybe remember what its previous answer was, but it can reach back pretty far into your interaction with the bot, the prompt. I don't know what the proper term for it is, but it's like you're having an actual conversation with a person in that they don't immediately wipe their memory banks from something you said 5 minutes ago. Right. So one of the other things I wanted to call out, and it's been referenced in a lot of the writing I've seen about ChatGPT, is that you can't always trust the answers it's giving you, because it will frequently answer in what I kind of
called dad mode, where when a young child asks their parent a question, there's kind of this expectation that, well, dad always knows the answer to everything. Even when he doesn't, he's got to come up with a reasonable sounding answer. And it will do that often. That if it doesn't, it will rarely say, oh, I don't know the answer to that. There's some things it'll say, well, I can't answer that for this reason. But it will often come up, maybe not often, but it can come up with an answer that seems reasonable, and it will give a very logical justification for its answer, but it happens to be wrong. So that's kind of the danger zone there, especially if it's hard to pinpoint those unless the topic you're asking about is something that you have a high level of familiarity with, so that you can spot when it's kind of going off the rails there.
Right. And I suspect there'll never be an AI that's always right. Or any intelligence for that matter, unless the universe is way simpler than
that's a huge hurdle to overcome. I'm sure there are people working towards that. But
I mean, it could definitely be a lot more careful. And I think that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of iteration. But they've definitely got it over the. To
put that in context, this is the same caveat you have to take whenever you read anything on the internet, because just because it's posted somewhere on the internet and it sounds truthy doesn't mean it's actual facts. And I don't know how much of this is that it's drawing from potentially faulty information, or if it's just trying to bridge gaps in its knowledge by connecting pieces, and it's maybe doing that in some places where those connections are not legitimate.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's talk about some of our initial attempts. So we had it try to brainstorm topics for the show. We had it write some code, which is really helpful, honestly. You put yourself out of a job, and then we had it write some political speeches, some hypothetical political speeches, in addition to some like science fiction-y political speeches. So let's look at let's start with the first one. Well, you did a lot of this, which write an outline for episodes of the Local Maximum. So at first it thought the podcast was only about the concept of the local maximum. So it wrote a bunch of ideas, examples of local maxima in decision making. Next, Max and Aaron will discuss how the concept of a local maximum can be applied to personal decision making. Come up with a list of topics for the Local Maximum podcast. Same thing. But then you said, hey, sometimes we talk about other things. Can you include those things in the list? And it does. Let me just, I'm just going through here. There's so many, I can't just read them all. It would take too long, but the use of math in medical research, discussing the roles of mathematics in medical research, the development of new treatments, therapy. That's a little too vague, I think. The impact of technology in society, the mathematics of artificial intelligence.
But number 3 on the list here was future of transportation, examining the role of mathematics in the development of new transportation technologies, such as self-driving cars and electric vehicles. And that's something that we've at least partially touched on, even if not exactly phrasing it that way. Self-driving
I think it was
cars
hung
is a
up on
recurring element.
Yeah, I think it was hung up on everything had to relate to mathematics specifically.
Right, yeah, because I told it we also talk about technology and current events, and so it's still got a heavy math focus.
Exploring how
concept.
Athletes and teams often fall into the trap of settling for a local maximum and how they can overcome this to achieve their goals. Really, really interesting. Okay, now I think this is really useful for code. Like I said before, in terms of getting started on a new language, and even if it's giving you code that's wrong, it's not going to be wrong in the way of it'll tell you correct commands that you could if you ask it to write some C code, or if you ask it to write Python that sorts a list, it'll actually give you the correct sorting function, and so. Okay, great. I could use that. I see how it's done here. I could copy and paste it in my code at least. So I think that is just a really fast way to get things like that done. And I don't know, people have reported that they've done some more substantial projects in ChatGPT. So that's pretty exciting. I mean, I haven't looked at C in 15 years, and I had it write some C code that finds the what did I ask it to do? Write some C code that finds the 3 largest elements of a list, And I'm like, oh, great. It just gets me right back into C. I know how to do that now. It's some fancy ass C it's giving me here. It's like, look, going at pointers and wait, let me actually look at this. The top three, the three largest number. Yeah, it's doing some weird stuff with like, size of int and doing a B search, and it's giving me some fancy C, but now it's like, okay, all of a sudden, not only maybe I could have done this in C before, but now I immediately know some fancy commands in C that I didn't know before, just by doing the search and seeing how it did it. So I think it's going to be a great way to learn a language. I wonder if it does language translation. It might be an interesting way to learn foreign languages as well as computer languages. But it's really kind of fascinating in that way. I think I could actually use something like this while coding. Like, I think this is actually useful right out of the box.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing if I can use this as easy mode for some stuff at work in the future. Yeah. Okay. So we've got some political speeches here. I don't know if we want to actually go into all of them, but we did like... Yeah, I'm a little apprehensive about diving too deep into them.
We're not going to dive them in, but we were like, oh, okay, write a political speech of, Joe Biden announcing he's running for re-election. Do a political speech of Donald Trump announcing he's running for re-election. We have like some crazy scenarios, like write a speech for the president who's announcing he's deploying nuclear weapons, something like that. So you could have some pretty. You could concoct some pretty crazy scenarios and say write that speech and it'll do it. I wrote here write a very whiny political speech. And I'm just going to read the introduction. My fellow Americans, I come to you today with a heavy heart and a deep sense of frustration and disappointment. For too long, I have been denied the recognition and respect that I deserve. For too long, I have been ignored and overlooked by those in power, but no longer. And it goes on. And you know what? Some of these speeches are actually not that bad, to be honest. Yeah,
it's definitely picked up on the kind of the cadence and the tone of political speech, and somehow lump that into a category. So it's drawing from the right section of the corpus there.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then some of it is a little bit. What did I say? It's like a little disconcerting. It's a little bit uncanny valley because it's like, okay, you could concoct a horrible scenario and have like the president give a speech, and then it's like it feels kind of real, and it's like, okay, so there's some horrible stuff happening, and they're just making like a speech like this, and you're like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. Maybe you can help explain what I'm trying to say better, but it's just it's a little disconcerting that it's almost like you're seeing how the sausage is made, like. Something horrible is happening. Write a speech to make it sound not that bad, and then it does it, and you're like, "Ooh!"
Especially because all of the political speeches kind of have some similar tone, similar thread, and so it's the speech saying that announcing that I'm running for re-election, or the inauguration speech we asked it to write, don't sound that different than the speech saying that I've authorized the use of nuclear weapons against Russia because of their aggression in the Ukraine, and you don't want those speeches to kind of just sound the same. They should be dramatically different. But is that because it's not diverse enough in its writing, or is it because our political speeches are all going to kind of sound the same, regardless of what they're talking about?
Yeah. So in this nuclear weapons speech, I understand that this news will be alarming to many of you, but I want to assure you that we have taken every precaution to minimize the risk of further escalation. I'm like, is that very reassuring? I don't know. But some of the things that it puts in there does indicate that it kind of understands what the issues are associated with. I mean, not always perfect, but it kind of understands what issues are associated with what actions. So that's pretty interesting. So,
yeah,
all right.
It's fascinating to play around with, and you can definitely find yourself far down the rabbit hole and having lost several hours just pushing it in different directions and seeing what it spits out.
Yeah, but I think that's well worthwhile these days because this is something new, and this is something that you could actually use to incorporate.
Yeah, if somebody hasn't already done it, I'm sure it's just around the corner for someone to turn this into like a dungeon master for an interactive D&D campaign, because you can give it some very basic prompts and requirements, and then it can kind of just keep rolling with stuff. The pun sort of intended there.
Right.
So I think that kind of interactive storytelling would be a great use case for this type of tool.
All right. Yeah. And there's a lot of use cases coming down the line, and we'll talk about it here on the Local Maximum. I think we're going to wrap up for today on that topic, just because it's fascinating, but we're just getting into it. And so let's get into our probability distribution of the week.
And now the probability distribution of the week.
All right, nice bumper there. Probability distribution of the week. I actually asked ChatGPT if it had any suggestions for probability distribution of the week. Some of them we've done, but today I wanted to get to the Poisson distribution. I've been trying to get to this for several weeks, but I wanted specifically for you to be on it because this is kind of an important one. By the way, ChatGPT says examples of the Poisson processes include, well, we'll get to that in a little bit, but actually they gave me good examples because I always have this problem where I can't find very good examples. But what is the Poisson distribution? So the Poisson distribution is, you're going to get a count of something. So there are events happening left and right, certain types of events. Here's where I have trouble coming up with an example. One is like you're at a road and you're looking at cars going by, or you're looking at how often some decay event happens in like a radioactive material.
So the one that when I was doing some pre-work here, the one that the Wikipedia article mentions is how many goals are going to be scored in a soccer game.
Okay. I actually don't think that is... that's a good example of a count, but I don't think that's a good example of Poisson, and I'll give you an example, or a reason why example. So examples of Poisson processes from ChatGPT says some other examples are arrival of customers at a retail store, the occurrence of earthquakes, and the arrival of packets in a computer network. So
I take issue with that last one because it is my my professional duty is to make that less of a this type of distribution, to make it entirely predictable. But that's an edge case.
No, okay, no, that's good to know. That's good to know. Okay, so there's bottom line is you're going to get a count. And you don't know what that count's going to be. It could be 0. It could be 1. It could be 2. And so the Poisson distribution is a distribution over all natural numbers, including 0. And over what could this count be? And so you're counting a certain type of event, like we said, a certain arrival of customer or something happening. And so you have what I think are these 3 assumptions on how these events occur. First of all, they occur randomly. Meaning there's not some that's very vague, but I think more specifically, they occur independently, meaning that each event doesn't care about the timing of other such events, which I think a goal in soccer, you're not likely to have 2 goals within like 10 seconds of each other. Sorry, go ahead.
Two thoughts on that. One, for the soccer, I think they phrased it a little bit differently in that they said that the mean number of goals in a soccer game is like 2.5.
Right.
And so the distribution wasn't necessary. It was more if you're observing a soccer game, how many goals will there be total?
Right. That could actually be a good like the Poisson distribution might actually fit that very well. And we'll talk about that.
But when you raise the issue of independence, that makes me question earthquakes, because earthquakes frequently experience aftershocks, which I haven't studied the causes behind earthquakes, but I would assume that that makes the aftershocks somewhat dependent on the initial quake.
Right. So it's not
push it away from that. But maybe if we're just looking at initial quakes and disregarding aftershocks, that still applies.
Yeah. Or, I mean, some of these are just, they're not exactly independent, but they're close enough. And also, it assumes uniformity, that these events occur uniformly, meaning that if you look at some period of time, let's say you look at 1 hour or 1 minute, and you have some distribution of counts that you'll see in that 1 minute, that means any other minute will have the same distribution. So it has an equation that is somewhat simple, but kind of complicated to discuss over audio. But there's one parameter, and the parameter is lambda. And that lambda parameter is essentially the number of events that you expect to occur per time unit. So, for example, let's use the example of cars passing. Like, let's suppose you expect on average 10 or 10.5 cars to pass per minute. Then lambda will be 10.5, and then that means not every minute is going to. Well, every minute can't have 10.5, but that doesn't mean some minutes will have 10, some minutes will have 11, but maybe just by randomness, some minutes will have 5, some minutes will have 30, some minutes will have... Now, probably there won't be a minute that has 100. That'll probably be a very low probability in this case, because it's
way
uniform.
Out of the tail.
Right. But it's going to be somewhere around there. So the formula is, if K is the number of cars, or the K is your count, the probability of seeing the count K under condition lambda is lambda to the power of K times e to the minus lambda over K factorial. And that is derivable. It actually can also be thought of as the limit of what I like to call Boolean buckets. So, let's suppose that you want to have something that has probability 1. Like, let's suppose lambda is 1, right? And I pick a time unit. Let's say an hour. Okay, I think this thing's going to occur once an hour, right?
Yep.
Well, okay. This isn't a Poisson distribution, but let's say I have something where it's like, it's Boolean. It'll either occur 0 or 1 time in the first half hour, and it'll either occur 0 or 1 time in the second half hour. And on average, it'll occur once. Now, of course, maybe it can occur more times than 1 in each half hour. So you're like, okay, let's break it down further. Maybe let's break it down into 15-minute chunks. There are 4 chunks now. And so each of the 4 chunks is a Boolean, except now instead of having a 50-50 chance of 1 in each bucket, it has only a 25% chance of occurrence in each bucket. And then you could divide that further.
By dividing that further, are we... So in the initial case where we have 2 30-minute buckets and we say it can either happen or not happen.
Right,
so
50-50.
We're saying that there's our possible outcomes are it doesn't happen at all, it happens once, or it happens in both 30-minute, so it happens a total of 2 times in the hour.
Right.
If we break it into 4 15-minute blocks, each with a 25% chance of it occurring, are our possible outcomes now it happens 1, 2, 3, or 4 times within the hour?
Yeah, or 0. Yeah.
Okay. So, there's also the 0 case. So by subdividing it, we're actually increasing the range of possible occurrences. Is that?
Yes, but we're keeping constant the number of
expected
the
outcome.
average. Yes. So let's say you divide it into 100 pieces. Then in each tiny slice of time, or 1,000 pieces, in each tiny slice of time, 0 is very likely, 1 is very unlikely. But when you add it all together, you still have the same average. And so if you kind of take that limit, like, calculus style, then you get that Poisson formula, that Poisson distribution.
Yeah, so the other example that was mentioned was things like 100-year storms, which they have a lambda of once for a unit of time of 100 years.
Right.
And you can apply the Poisson distribution to that for, what's the likelihood that you'll see 200-year storms in a 100-year period, or 3 or 4, which is perhaps very relevant when we're talking about extreme weather events, which appeared or at least have been reported in some contexts to be increasing in frequency. Is what is the likelihood of that occurring without a dramatic change in the underlying factors? Is there an actual change in weather systems, or is this just that we're kind of off the center mark in the likelihood of this occurring, but it's still within a reasonable spectrum?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good way to think about it. 100-year storm, and also
I think if you look at the case with a lambda of 1 over a 100-year period, the chances of zero occurrences and the chance of one occurrence are equal, and then that it starts to drop off dramatically when you start looking at 2 or 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah. So, and I also want to point out that you can kind of change the time period to adjust the lambda. So you could think of a 100-year storm as having a lambda of 1 over a 100-year time period, or you could think of it as having a lambda of 1 over 100 in a 1-year time period.
Right.
So it's the same distribution, just over different time scales, which is why this one is so simple. It's like normal distributions have standard deviation and mean. This just has one parameter. And interestingly enough, the mean is lambda itself, and the standard deviation is also lambda in this case. So it's one interesting way one really cool thing about this distribution, and it's also easy to estimate from data. So if you look at if you count events over a certain period of time, you can begin to estimate. Actually, there's you could use Bayesian inference to estimate it using the gamma distribution, which is a little more advanced. We'll talk about that later. But you could start to estimate it pretty quickly based on, a first estimate is just count the number of events over the time you observed.
So if we're trying to determine whether a particular set of behaviors or parameters is a good candidate for the Poisson distribution, again, does it fit that criteria of it's a randomly occurring event, the occurrences of the event are independent of each other, and the likelihood of the event occurring at any given point in time is more or less uniform. Is that
right?
Is there anything else that we can use as kind of a shortcut for determining if this is a good or a bad use case for Poisson?
Well, I think you could actually use Poisson in more complicated cases in order to as kind of like a first estimate. So let's give an example of the cars on the road, right?
Yep.
Now, any given road, just think of like a busy street in your town. The hour at 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. is going to have a much higher rate than the hour of 4 a.m. to 5 a.m. It's not just that it's not just it's not same lambda, but randomness. It's literally a different rate. And so I think what you could think of kind of a broader distribution where, instead of having a constant lambda over time, you actually have a lambda that is changing over the course of the day. Ooh. And then you're having events come in. Now that's no longer Poisson, but it's
lambda is
locally,
no longer a fixed value, but lambda is some sort of function.
Right. And so then you could say,
is there a name for that when you're plugging a function into lambda instead of
no, I mean, maybe there is. I actually don't know. I would just call it like it's locally Poisson. And maybe you could bucket by hour and assume each hour is Poisson. And there's so many different, as someone who's modeling the world, there are so many different things you could do with this that are kind of interesting.
Or you could certainly make an argument that
you could model it as some periodic function, like some kind of a, you can have it you could have it be, if you do it every hour, it's like a bucketed function. That's a step function where lambda is constant, but change every hour. Or you could probably also model it as some kind of a periodic function where lambda is changing over time and some smooth and the events come in. And that's probably more common in the real world.
Yeah, I was going to say you could make an argument that the case of cars driving by, an observation point, satisfies none of the criteria for Poisson if you make your bounds wide enough. So if we're looking at a 24-hour period, well then it's not random because people are going to be traveling at there's rush hour, so the distribution is going to be following some function there, and it's not independent because people are going to be adjusting their travel patterns based on when they expect the traffic to be the highest, and it's certainly not uniform. But if we take a smaller view on that and then slice that up into small chunks, we could perhaps say that Poisson applies to within the rush hour window, or depending on how we slice it. So that's an interesting way of thinking that we may not be able to apply it to the bigger picture, but we may be able to slice it small if we slice it small enough, or go in the completely opposite direction. We might not be able to meaningfully apply that to the likelihood of a 100-year flood tomorrow, but we can if we're looking at a period over several years. Yeah, and now it's a flood, not a storm. But I mean, that 100-year flood is also, we're kind of using Poisson distribution as an ideal where really it's more like Boolean buckets because you can't have 200-year floods in the same day. If you, it's almost either, yep, it's flooded or no, it's flooded. I'm not going to call you up. You wouldn't believe this, but I have 2 floods going on in my house right now. That's not going to happen. Or, I mean, I guess I could say 2 rivers are overflowing nearby, but those would be highly correlated, I would think. But I think, like the normal distribution, nothing is exactly it, but it's a good building block, and it's a good assumption as if you know when to deploy it. It's a good it's a good first approximation or even final approximation in certain circumstances. Okay, so I'm going to definitely keep this one in my back pocket for the next time I'm making a prediction on
You're
the
sold.
calculus, because
You're
it seems
sold
like
on Poisson.
That's an area where it could be particularly useful.
Yeah, I agree. I agree as well. I'm trying to think of an example of where in Metaculus the Poisson distribution would be useful. And just wait, have you ever done a gamma Poisson? We don't have time to get into that. That's got to be another one.
I have not, and I need to refresh myself on gamma before I could visualize that. But for another day. Yeah, those are fantastic. This is why we're doing this, because this is a really important building block. In some ways, I think it's as important as the normal distribution, because this applies to counts, which is really common, which is just as common as like the real number type data that you get in the normal distribution. Well, so can you put in a non-integer value for k? I know.
Oh, no, not k. No.
Okay, because I know we were saying in the example of like counting cars that if lambda is 10.5, well, we can't get a 10.5 car coming by. So k has to be an integer. Right. But lambda can be any natural number.
No, any positive real number.
Okay.
Including 0. It could be. So lambda can be. You can have on average 10.5
What does a
cars
lambda
per hour.
of 0 mean?
That just means the event never occurs.
Okay.
So that would mean 100% chance that k is 0, and every other k has a 0% chance.
That becomes very boring.
Yeah. But still good to know. But you could certainly have very small lambda.
Sure.
So, and then it becomes interesting again. All right. So that's a good one. I hope we've sold people on Poisson. I hope because I think it's. I think it's. I don't know why we teach normal in, I think, high school, but we don't really teach Poisson. But I think in some ways Poisson is more interesting. I could be wrong about this, but maybe it requires a little bit more calculus
it sounds too
to
French. It's exotic and foreign.
Yeah, I mean that's just the mathematician that came up with it, Poisson. So, well, look, I mean the normal is actually called the Gaussian. So that's what is that, German?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it Carl Friedrich Gauss?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, is that the same Gauss who's involved in electromagnetism?
I would assume.
Or is this a scenario like Bernoulli, where there are like 12 different Bernoullis who all did amazing things in various fields?
Nope. He did electromagnetism.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm surprised because I know him more for his mathematical stuff, but I guess he did everything.
It was the age of polymaths.
Yeah. For sure. All right. Let us know what you think. LocalMaxRadio at gmail.com, localmaxradio.com for the website, and maximum.locals.com to join our community. Aaron, any last words today? Any last thoughts? Not any last words. You're not being executed. I'm sorry.
I am very much looking forward to seeing what our listeners come up with and send us from playing around with ChatGPT. ChatGPT. That's a real tongue twister. But
is
yeah,
Is it GP? It's GPT. Okay.
At least that's what I see pasted in our notes here.
You're right.
I'm looking forward to that. So but post that stuff to the locals where we'll be watching.
All right. Thank you. Excellent. All right. Great. Have a great week, everyone. That's the show. To support the Local Maximum, sign up for exclusive content and our online community at maximum.locals.com. The Local Maximum is available wherever podcasts are found. If you want to keep up, remember to subscribe on your podcast app. Also, check out the website with show notes and additional materials at localmaxradio.com. If you want to contact me, the host, send an email to localmaxradio@gmail.com. Have a great week.
Feel the power.